All right, my sweetie community, welcome to More Than Grief. It is such a delight to bring this space back together. This has been going on since I want to say 2021, when the first More Than Grief was hosted in, I believe, September. And it was a month-long experience where we met at least 4 to 5 times and processed the different forms of grief we were experiencing. And that's exactly what we're back to do tonight. More Than Grief has expanded and been reiterated at least 4 or 5 times since then. But tonight we're just going to do a little preview, a little taste, and I will escort you into how you can practice your own self-paced version of More Than Grief afterwards if you've enjoyed what you've experienced tonight, which I trust that you will. So I am so eager to have this conversation where we acknowledge that grief isn't only about death, right? It can also show up through divorce, through relational rupture, through loss of identity, through loss of safety, through loss of health and shifts in our health, loss of autonomy, maybe even feelings of loss of different versions of ourselves, right? So, however, today our focus is centering grief connected to death while also acknowledging the other forms that may be present, acknowledging the different types of grief we might each be experiencing, and how when you experience one form of loss, whether it's related to grief focused on death or not, it can have this ripple effect towards all the other losses that you've ever experienced, and it all feels like it's closing in on you all at once. But that also points to grief that we might not have processed. So this is our opportunity to just become familiar with some areas of grief that have been particularly highlighted for me in my journey. I am a long-time griever. I would say that I have been essentially a lifelong griever. With my first experience of really recognizing what grief is and what death is at about the age of 5 or 7 years old, when I realized that not only could my goldfish and my guinea pig die, but that death actually came for people too. And then not only recognizing death came for people, but death came for people who I knew. Not just people in the world, people in my family, people who look like me. And lo and behold, death was going to come for me too someday. Right? So we all had these moments where we had to process this for the first time. And most of us in Western culture don't come from families that invite conversations about death, invite conversations about processing loss. What ends up happening is that because the experience of loss is so overwhelming for them, they try to shelter their children from it. They try to protect their children from what it could be like to experience it, not acknowledging that it is inevitable. Loss is inevitable. Grief is inevitable. We cannot outplan pain. What we can do is try to be as communicative and supportive of one another as we go through it so that we don't feel isolated, like something's wrong with us, when all we want to do after the loss of a loved one is scream for days on end. Or all we want to do is curl up in the fetal position and moan. It's not even a crying, it's like a wailing, right? These very primitive expressions that we don't see featured in the world, highlighted in the world, that make us feel like we're broken, like we're losing it. When really our body is naturally going through the mechanisms that are in place to help us start to discharge the energy that comes with grief, to help us start to integrate, as painful as it is, a new reality where the loss that we've experienced can exist. It is a transition, not only for our loved one, not only for the opportunity that we have to grieve or the relationship we have to grieve, but also for us and how we have to get to know a different version of us that doesn't have access to that person or that relationship or that situation that we once did. So I'd like to start off by just letting you know there are going to be 2 opportunities in tonight's talk for you to share. All those opportunities are optional. What you can expect from our flow is that I'm going to share with you the highlighted areas of where grief has most impacted me. I'm not going to take you through the traditional, like, first there's denial and then there's anger and bargain. I'm not going to take you through that. I think that's very common information, and I'm not here to give you a common experience. I'm here to talk about the points that I feel are most relatable, but sometimes we don't know how to articulate, or we don't even realize how much we're doing it. That's what I want to highlight tonight. So we're going to take a different approach to grief. And I really look forward to hearing if you feel led to share what resonates with you in your experience or how your experience is different. We also are going to see if we can work in a brief 5 to 7 minute meditation. This meditation is going to be focused on you getting to connect with the you before the grief. A lot of times when I'm grieving, I'll tell you transparently, I'm grieving for the version of me that didn't know she was going to have to be this strong, didn't know she was going to have to be this regulated, didn't know she was going to have to mother herself in this way. And so often I just want to go back and like hold that version of me as she encounters or is about to encounter that phone call or that moment. And so we're going to have a moment where the grief isn't about the external catalyst, the other person, the relationship, the opportunity. We're going to have a moment in this meditation where we grieve ourselves and where we get to connect with that version of ourselves that did experience it for the first time, didn't know it was coming. And we, as the experienced grievers we are at this point, are sharing our wisdom from the other side with that version of ourselves. Because nobody could speak to us the way that we would need to speak to us about what's about to come ahead, right? And so while this could sound daunting, I invite you to really embody the fact that you carry these emotions all the time and they pop out at inopportune moments. This is a intentional moment to gather all of that experience you have with trying to reassure yourself and really pour it into the part of you that is the most vulnerable, the part of you that hadn't yet started to build the strength to both carry grief and joy. That is exactly what I get to witness in you right now. Those are the people who are brave enough to log onto this call because you are aware of your grief. You're not hiding from it. And you've realized you can't avoid it. So you're looking for tools to work with it. So I'm going to give you major tools. I'm going to give you deep perspective. And then I'm going to let you chew on it. I invite you to take what serves you. I invite you to leave what doesn't. I invite you to share your experience as you feel led to. And I invite you to see a reflection of your experience and other people's as well. Okay? Questions are welcome throughout this entire time together. You do not have to wait till the end. There is no such thing as a stupid or inappropriate question, especially when it comes to grief. And if at any point something is particularly resonating with you, please feel free to just pop into the chat I'd like to share. And we'd love to hear from you. Okay? Okie dokie. So the main things I want to talk about this evening, as I tell you that I want to approach grief from a different perspective, is that I want to talk about rage. I want to talk about being disoriented. I want to talk about rumination and how we replay and replay and replay these situations and our experiences before the loss, before the trauma. And how that's our brain's way of still trying to make sense and solve problems. I want to talk about pain with you. I want to talk about how emotional pain is experienced the same as physical pain is in our bodies as human beings, because it happens in microseconds or shorter. And we cognitively don't catch up for a number of microseconds later to understand what exactly our body is viscerally feeling. I also want to talk about relief with you. Relief is some wild, beautiful emotion that eventually stirs in us in our experience with grief. And a lot of times guilt will come soon after. And so we don't let ourselves experience relief because it just feels like, I don't deserve it. Or if I accept it, then it's pointing to I didn't really love them or love the relationship as much as I'm saying that I did. So relief and guilt will kind of talk about hand in hand because they have this very twisted loop-de-loop that they do together. And so those are the main areas that we're going to talk about before I give you an opportunity to also just kind of share about what kind of grief you came into the room carrying today. We'll work in a deeper understanding of how grief impacts our brains. And then we'll also work in our meditation before a closing group discussion. I send you off with some resources, and then we get into our Sunday evenings of self-care and regulation, okay? So who's ready to talk about rage? Anybody ready to talk about rage? I'm ready to talk about rage. Okay, so I am an ancient baby that is a proud rager. Okay. And what I mean by a proud rager is I have recognized that suppressing the anger that I have carried inside, even if I didn't always understand the anger I carried inside, has done me no good. If I continue to carry it buried inside, it won't do me any good. And it's not just anger. Anger isn't colorful enough for the different layers of fighting back that this body of mine wants to do towards the losses it has experienced. And my favorite things to point out and to highlight when we're talking about rage, I love to highlight that it is the protest of the unfairness of the loss. Like, I don't know about you, but when I think about the losses that I've experienced in my life, there's a part of me that's like, no, no, no. And the more that I realize that death doesn't care about my no and my defiance, the angrier I get. And that's the thing. It starts off at the anger that my defiance and my demand for this to be undone is not being heard, right? So then, okay, that's anger. But then all these different micro moments where I am crying out for this person or for this relationship or for this version of myself, and my cries go unmet in the way that I want them to be met, like wanting that person to essentially reincarnate and be present with me, right? When I don't get that level of comfort, the rage is amplified. It's a constant reminder whenever I slip into sadness or depression about grief, right? Rage is right there, wanting me to not feel so powerless in it. It really is my body fighting a reality that my mind has not accepted. And that's why people talk about anger and they talk about how they're afraid of their anger. I hear them talk a lot about being afraid to never be able to release it. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's because most of us socially don't have outlets for our anger, don't have outlets for our rage. That's why you'll catch me quarterly or at least twice a year hosting a DIY rage room for the community. Because it's like, no, we need to beat some tires. We need to light some things on fire. We need to break some glass that represents generational curses. We need to scream intentionally or have the confessional sessions with a stranger on the other side and share our truth that we wouldn't tell someone we know. We need a release. And most people are so busy trying to suppress their grief, trying to make sure they don't make anyone else uncomfortable with their grief, that their rage festers inside of them. And it can eat you alive. It can deteriorate you. That level of anger, that level, it's all about control. It's all about a false sense of security because we really are just fighting against slipping into depression, slipping into helplessness and hopelessness. And so I've learned to embrace my rage. I've learned to embrace the part of me that is fighting against this reality. Not because I'm trying to say I need to keep fighting against it, but I see it now, that rage, as my body fighting for me. The rage is my body saying, I'm trying to keep us from shutting down. I'm looking for any bit of power I can so that I still feel capable of moving forward. If I don't have this anger to fuel me, I feel like I could slip into a level of numbness, a level of helplessness, and you might not consciously recognize any of this happening, right? You might just sense it. But because many of us have been taught not to trust what we feel, not to trust our senses, our nudges, our intuition, we don't know how to unpack the sensations that are asking for our attention. And if you hear nothing else tonight, please know that your attention towards yourself is medicine. And you need your own medicine desperately, especially when you are going through a loss, especially when you're grieving. And grief is not something that has any expiration date on it. Grief is not linear. And grief will involve you in a cyclical fashion, experiencing the same wounds at different levels of growth and healing, and having to see how much progress you've made because of how quickly you can recover when you are re-triggered and reactivated by a wound that you thought you had healed from in relationship to your grief. And you do start to see that progress, right? You're able to hear your loved one's favorite song and you don't immediately burst into tears. Now, you might cry in the car. You very well might, because you think about it again and now there's a safe, quiet place and you can let yourself soften in that way. But you also might not need to cry in the car, right? So, just starting off with rage, I want you to be able to recognize where rage is coming up for you in your grief experience. And what are you doing with it? Are you sitting on it? Or are you exploring it? And if you are exploring it, are you creating ritual around how to release it so that you can transmute that destructive energy into something that helps you rebuild yourself? Because that's the only way through grief. You cannot keep who you were. That person who you were has passed on with whatever thing, person, situation, relationship you are grieving. You have to rebuild a new you. And that's uncomfortable to face, especially when we didn't choose to have to be in the situation. But that's a part of it. That's a part of it. So I'm going to move us now into disorientation. Okay, disorientation as another major highlighted area of grief that this one really gets to me because it's that foggy experience, right? You're disoriented, you're detached, you're unsure who you are now. If you've been married for so many years, and maybe you've been married longer than you knew life without being married, maybe you got married young, right? If you get a divorce, you don't know who you are right now. Who is this person not attached to that other human being? If you have experienced a falling out with your family because you are the black sheep or you are the cycle breaker and people want to keep repeating cycles and patterns, so now you've decided, okay, I can't connect with my family in that way. Absolutely, you are going to have to rebuild your identity. You are going to have moments of being unsure who you are, even if you're clear on who you are not, and that's why you've created the boundary with your family. You're still going to have to figure out who you are, right? If you have lost someone, if you've lost a fur baby, or if you've lost a family member, a spouse, a child, my goodness, a sibling, if you've lost any of these people, your brain has built in their existence into your internal blueprint. So when this person is removed, your brain has to now learn how to live and work and move and navigate you around this massive gap of data that it's used to having as a source to pull from. And that's why we struggle with disorientation when we're grieving. Our brain is needing a reminder that our person, one, isn't there, but also our brain needs a reminder that they were there. It's both. We need a reminder that they were there, but we also need to accept that they aren't there the way that they were. And this is very difficult for our brain to process and to make sense of and to understand. And this is why, in my experience, grief really does feel like a experience that is bigger than being human, because it forces you to accept and to communicate with something bigger than you. It forces you to recognize that with how alive we are right now, the fact that there can be such a drastic opposite to that, because I don't know if you've been around a loved one who's no longer present in their vessel. Isn't it wild how like they ain't in there? Like, do you ever sit there and like you look at you like you got the same face, you got the same, but that ain't you. That ain't you. That's disorienting for me. Till this day, I cannot make sense of looking at things, people, pets that were very alive and facial expressions that I'm used to seeing, and then to look at them as an inanimate object. It baffles my mind. My flabbers are gasted. I don't know what to do with it. And that's why I'm always interested in hearing other people's disorientation stories, because it makes me feel a little more human myself. And that's what makes me recognize why we have to have more conversations about these other areas of grief, not just the bargaining and the anger and the depression, but the disorientation, the denial. Initially, we could say it's denial because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with our reality. But then the disorientation that for me has lasted many years. There are some times that I sit and I just have to whisper to myself, she was real. And I'm referring to my mother. Like I have to say it out loud to me. She was real. Like I didn't make that up. I know that I have no evidence of it necessarily around me. I know that my mental map has now blueprinted a world that doesn't have places for me to go to experience her. So, was she real? And it's like, yeah, she was real. She was real. I assure you, she was real. So, disorientation is that experience of the brain both needing to make sense that they aren't gone, but that they are gone. And that this requires us to get more familiar with how to communicate with them, even though there is a difference in how we communicate. Energy is how we need to learn how to communicate. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I think it was one of Oprah's podcasts, and one of the women she had on, I think pretty reputable, right? It's Oprah, well, we can assume. And she was talking about how you might notice that if you connect your loved ones with signs like dragonflies or butterflies or maybe bees or ladybugs, most of those insects require an electric magnetic pathway, as that's how they fly. That's how they move and navigate. And that is the language of energy. That is the language of spirit. So to see things go by, this is just us syncing up energetically, the same frequency as our loved ones. And that's when we see the signs, we see the synchronicities, right? But if we are so deep in our survival mode, if we are so deep in our disorientation, our rumination, as we are about to explore, our rage, right? It's very hard to be on the frequency and the wavelength of peace, of light, of pure positive play. And these are all the things that I speak over my ancestors and my loved ones who are no longer presently with me. They don't speak the language of rage, not the way that I do right now. And if I want a relationship with them, I have to regulate myself enough to meet them at a higher level. And they're not judging me. They say live in rage as long as you need to, because I know that rage is trying to protect you. I know that rage is trying to spare you from slipping into heavier places. And I assure you that I still believe that when you slip into the depression, when you slip into what is known in the polyvagal theory as dorsal vagal, you're essentially just limp. You're barely in there. That rock bottom is necessary for so many people. I mean, my own father on the call can speak to how he had to hit a literal physical rock bottom. His life had to hang in the balance for him to be like, I guess I could choose to live for myself, even though my wife is dead. I guess I could see if there's something to life just for me. A lot of people need that. And a lot of us actively are trying to, especially if you're the strong friend, okay? Especially if you are the wounded healer, you're trying to keep people from getting to that place. You're trying to spare them from hitting that rock bottom because you probably hit that rock bottom yourself and you know how terrifying it is, but you also aren't giving yourself credit for how transformative that rock bottom was for you and how we don't need to enable folks. We need to support them lovingly through allowance of them hitting their rock bottom so that they can rebuild themselves in a sustainable way, right? So we've talked about rage, we've talked about disorientation, right? And I want to move us now into rumination. So rumination, in short, we could say is all about replaying moments the brain is attempting to regain control over. And essentially it's playing these on loops. Even though it cannot change what the loop is, it's the mind trying to rewrite reality so the loss makes sense. We just want it to make sense. And death just don't make sense. Even when you have a loved one, even when you have a loved one who lives to be, he passed away at 105, you still gonna grieve. And the brain is still going to sit there and be like, but did he have to? Why couldn't he make it to 106? Right? Just one more year. We're always going to be greedy for just one more something, one more day, one more month, one more year, one more decade. What would it be to be 115? Why not? Right? So rumination is, in a sense, in relationship to bargaining. It's not the request that bargaining is, But it is very much a discussion that your brain is having over and over again over the patterns they had, the patterns you had when they were around, the patterns you had when you were that person, right? If we're talking about grieving the loss of identity, the loss of health, if you had certain features or functions that you no longer have, if you've had anything amputated, or if you don't have the same access to certain functionality, all of these things you might be ruminating on, like when I could do it this way, when I could do this by myself. And rumination really is just this really overwhelming hyper focusing. The brain tries to solve the unsolvable. It keeps replaying moments to regain control that it will never be able to gain. And this appears in death and, of course, in non-death grief. So just being able to recognize the mental Olympics that your brain tries to go through just to gather this false sense of control. I used to ruminate and still can catch myself having moments of rumination, not as deep as they used to be. But my mom wrote a book, and it took me longer than it should have to read the book that she wrote. And I just remember her asking me at one point, like, have you read it? And my facial expression being all she needed to see to say, no, you haven't. And I have never forgiven myself for that moment. Like, that is a moment that I can replay so easily in my mind and just ruminate on. And it's a moment that I wonder how many times she thought about that moment. That's another part of rumination. Then your brain starts doing extra Olympics, right? It starts thinking about things we could never have any idea on. What did they think about what I think they might be thinking about? What did they think about me? Did they still feel safe? Did they feel like I saw and supported them? All of that gets tied in. And if you are someone, and we'll talk here in a little bit about different forms of grief, like ambiguous grief and compound grief and disenfranchised grief. But if anticipatory grief is a form you've ever heard of, which is essentially the grief you experience before a loss because you expect it, you see it coming. If you have someone who has a terminal illness, if you see someone if you're going through a long divorce, so all the expectation of what it'll be like when you're apart, that's anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief has haunted me all of my life, ever since realizing that my mom would die someday when I was about 5 or 7 years old. I have been dreading this reality that I'm living in right now since I was 5 or 7 years old, somewhere in there. And now I'm living in it. And it would just mean so much to be able to try to go back and console those versions of me who were actually ruminating about what this would be like in anticipation of it, trying to protect themselves from being shocked by it when it happened. I assure you, no matter how much ruminating, overthinking, analyzing you do about what it'll be like when the person you love or the relationship you love or the version of yourself you love passes or shifts or transitions, it doesn't matter how much overthinking you do, you could never prepare yourself for it. It is a waste of energy. And I don't know if you've tried it, but I can tell you as someone who's tried it many times, you're just better off getting to the moment and then meeting yourself in the moment. That's the only thing that makes any sense. Because otherwise, you're just perpetuating suffering that actually isn't solving or supporting anything that is relevant to how this is actually going to go. These are all just, once again, the anxiety-based Olympics that our brains jump through to try to protect from danger, threat, shutdown, harm, or overwhelmment. And all of those things are what grief feels like. All of those things are what grief feels like. And so it's understandable why we actively try to avoid it. And yet and still, here we are. So let's move into a little bit of discussion on guilt. And we'll keep the pacing going. And then I want to hear from you all shortly because I want to see how this is resonating with your experience so far. Okay? So guilt can look like that anticipatory grief piece as well, whether it's death or non-death. It leads us to asking these questions. Did I spend enough time? Could I have done more? Why didn't I see the signs? Why didn't I call sooner? If I left the person, or if we got a divorce and then they passed away, now there's guilt about would they have died if we would have stayed together? And there's all these hypotheticals, all these possibilities. But the reality is, no. This is where we're at right now. Those opportunities are null and void at this point. But guilt makes us jump through all those hoops, asking all those questions, once again, grasping at control or shaming ourselves for the control we did not utilize when we believed we had it. It's not helping you, right? It's not bringing you closer to your loved one. It's not helping you to time travel to the past so that you can live there. It's just punishing you for what you didn't do at a time where you might not have known what you needed to do. We have all this hindsight expectation of ourselves, very lacking of empathy. It's very lacking of compassion. And that's what we need the most when we're experiencing this grief, right? We need so much more compassion. We need a soft place to land. And so often we're so busy suppressing the grief that we're not committed to creating softness for ourselves in our day in and day out life. So there's guilt, right? Guilt's pretty popular. Most people are associating their grief with some form of guilt. So then if we look at pain, right? Pain we can talk about in the sense of physical sensations before emotional meaning is even assigned. Pain could be talked about as the tightness in your chest, the nausea you experience, the heaviness, the fatigue. Essentially, the body registers loss before the mind does. I remember when we were told, like, hey, your mom has passed away. The brain just shuts, it shuts down. Like it's like, oh no, this isn't happening. And if it is, I'm not going to be here to watch it. I'm going to make sure that this vessel that I'm in charge of is not overstimulated by it. I'm going to shut the whole thing down. So we experience visceral pain. It's so palpable. We experience it on such a deep level before our brains can cognitively function. What has happened? What has happened? Like, we heard the words, but the words have no meaning. But our body's response to it tells us everything we need to. The body is registering that loss even before the mind has. And that's why you might days later, months later, years later, be experiencing just certain moments of like nausea. Like you get sick to your stomach because the pain is so intense. You feel like you could be having palpitations because your heart starts beating so fast. You feel this heaviness, like your limbs weigh twice as much as they typically would, and fatigue. You've never known such type of tired. You've never been so bone tired, soul tired, right? So being able to even just acknowledge that your body is needing to rebuild a new self, it is like a rebirth that you are going through. Everything that you were is being burned away in this pain that is inescapable, it seems like. And something new is coming forth. Most of us would say, I would rather not have the something new just to have what I lost. But that's exactly why we don't get to control what we lose. Because we would limit ourselves from what we gain. And when you are going through grief, you can always measure what you'll lose, but you can't measure what you'll gain. You have no concept of it. You have no idea how big you actually are until grief cracks you open and shows you. And I can tell you many times, I adore the woman I've become. And if you asked me, would you be willing to give up your mom for that? 22-year-old me would have said, absolutely not. I will stay in this limited form forever, as long as I can stay with her. And I think my mom knew that too. I think that's why she was down to like, peace out. She was like, you know what? Me and you could have a lot more fun. Me and you could be a lot bigger than both of us are if I leave this vessel and if you choose to keep looking for me. Don't assume I've gone, just assume I've changed. And you can too. You start to see grief as an invitation once you stop fighting it. And that's what leads us into our final area of focus here, which is relief. And yes, relief can often come with some guilt with it too, right? Relief can definitely be experienced in that way. Sometimes there's this voice of shame of, I shouldn't feel okay when you're not here. Relief from their suffering ending is appropriate though, right? There's some forms of relief that we can wrap our minds around, like at least they're in a better place. That's why everybody always says that, right? They want you to feel relief. Oh, well, God's got them now. They're in a better place. And that might very well be true. But that doesn't necessarily soothe the heart of every griever. Even the God fearing ones sometimes are like, yeah, but real relief would be me getting to know exactly where they're at. It ain't that I don't love God. It ain't that I don't trust God. I just would like for God to give me a heads up over, you got him though? Like, I know you love him more than me, but do you got him? I just, because I'd sacrifice myself for him. So, do you got him? And nobody wants to admit to being so doubtful, right? Even to the creator themselves. But when you love big as a human, when you get to feel God's love, source's love, the creator's love pour through you and aim at somebody else, you do feel a certain entitlement to them. And death and loss teaches you you are not entitled to anyone. Nothing belongs to you. So be grateful and thankful for every experience with every being, with every soul you get to encounter. Because none of us are promised to any of us, right? So when we talk about relief, we're talking about relief from our own suffering getting to end. If you've been taking care of a loved one who was going through a chronic illness of some sort, if you've been taking care of someone who has just been going through long-standing suffering, it can feel a bit like betrayal if you are excited that they're out of their misery. But it could also just sincerely be relief. Like watching someone throw up every day, be uncomfortable no matter how they lay, wince and cry and ache, and now there's no more of that? How could relief be inappropriate? It's very appropriate, right? So, with that being the case, we want to recognize that guilt follows because relief can feel like betrayal. But relief is just our first invitation to actually start to move closer to the energy our loved ones, our new opportunities, our next healthiest relationship exists within. So that very emotional experience that we avoid because it feels like betrayal is the very experience that actually will allow us to start to invite our loved ones, our new opportunities, that next relationship into our lives. But some of us just don't feel like it's time to invite anything new in. Some of us feel like it's very inappropriate to even be thinking about inviting anything new in. It's understandable. But still, nothing is constant but change. So something new is going to have to come. So we want to invite ourselves to work with it instead of against it, to be curious of it instead of so hypercritical. So I've been running my mouth and you have been so beautiful, so tuned in to these major points that I want to share with you. So my question to you is, out of disorientation and rage and relief and guilt and pain and rumination, in your grief experience, which one has really kind of encompassed you, captivated you, or overwhelmed you? The floor is open. Share as much or as little as you'd like.
For myself, I feel like disorientation has been the a real consistent thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of rage, I also know that I'm kind of out of touch with that anger because it's like you shouldn't be angry, you should be grateful, and I am.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other emotions too. So I think I'm in touch with the rage, not as often as I possibly could be because there's other things with it at the same time,
Yeah.
and because I'm not as open to it.
Mm-hmm.
I know I really felt like I was an alien walking around um, with the losses and just really just this disconnect with reality. And it was the weather was changing. It was spring,
Mm-hmm.
but that was completely opposite to how I felt,
Mm-hmm.
and it made it worse
Mm-hmm.
because it's like the weather should be feeling the way I am. And even now, Ra, when I start to see the leaves falling and things dying, it feels good because it's like this is how it's supposed to be right now.
Yeah.
This is mirroring what I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm. That is so relatable, Sheila. That is so good. Yeah, this really is a reminder of just how disorienting it is that the world can mirror anything but the ache that we're experiencing with loss or grief. Like when you go to the grocery store and people are just shopping and you're like, do you not know my loved one died? Like, how are y'all just carrying on with your day? Do you not know that this should be a day of mourning for the world? And yet, it's just a day of mourning, it feels like, for us.
Yeah. And the grocery store would actually be a trigger too because I wasn't buying my husband snacks, things that he would like. Or I'm going down the aisle and say, oh, I guess I don't need to get that now. And, having a moment right there in the food line, because I can't, that there's a new norm,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even with something as simple as cookies.
That's all it takes. It could be cook. It could be just the way the wind touch your face one day. That's all it has. It could just remind you of how they used to brush your cheek. It could be anything that
Can
sets
be
us
anything.
off. Anything. And that's where it's like it seems unbearable or inescapable. And that's why we have to learn how to work with our pain instead of avoiding it because they're everywhere. And aren't we glad? I'm so glad that they're everywhere. And yet I also have to get used to you're everywhere except here the way I want you to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One more thing about the rage. I've got three daughters, and two of them really express rage. And I think that part of my way of mothering them is to not go there so that they could go there
Mm-hmm.
and I could be the soft place for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like I can't go over there with them. I need to be here to help them while they're over there
Mm-hmm.
raging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely get that. I just want to remind you that the family that rages together stays together.
We can rage
You
together.
can rage together, friend, okay? Because let me tell you, you are their mother, so them raging has a flavor of you in there. They have their own flavor, but
Yeah.
okay, you head rager, all right? Lead the
Yeah.
rage and then lead the regulation. Rage and then regulate. That's what
Yeah.
we do as a family,
I
okay?
like that. I like that.
You don't got to be left out. Get you some. How about others of you? Out of rumination, rage, guilt, pain, relief, what stands out for you?
Something that crossed my mind in all of this was how in each different category, whether it's rumination or rage, and I personally have, like probably most of us have, I've delved deeply into each one of them. And one of the things, and you just mentioned it about regulating, experiencing it, and then regulating yourself. There may have been a time when suppressing some of those emotions, some of those things would be the order of the day, but not really. I mean, what regulation? I saw a post today. Regulation isn't about you being calm through these different things. It's realizing that you can experience all of the things we're talking about. We can experience and then get to the point, be at the point, realize we are able to hold the all of this,
Yeah.
who that we're able to live with all of this and through all of this
Mm-hmm.
and come out better for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is the human experience. It is not to avoid pain or to avoid being triggered. It is to return to safety after being triggered. And to keep getting better and better and quicker at returning to safety because we know we will show up for ourselves. But when you don't know whether you'll come to your aid, it's really scary going through these triggers and feeling targeted in the world because you don't know what soft place you'll have to land if it's not going to be with you. That's good stuff. It's very good stuff, Daddy. Tika Tika, I see you driving. Do you want to share? Can you share safely?
Yes, I have. I'm down the street. Okay, so I do want to share. Can you hear me? Did I
Yes,
go ahead?
beautifully.
Okay, so it took me a while to kind of pinpoint like where my grief was at. I think I have a few different situations where I have grief, but the one that just came, I just thought of was I think rumination and can you list the names again?
Yeah, so it was rage, it was disorientation, it was guilt, pain, relief, and
Okay,
rumination.
okay, guilt. So my one of my cousins passed away last month, and he had just turned 21, and there was a like a freak car accident. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was
Mhm.
being responsible on his way home from work, and he died because of a head injury. And the guilt that I had, and I think about it sometimes, it comes to me like, dang, because I had a car accident in 2016, and I had a brain injury, and it's like, dang,
Mhm.
why did he have to? Like, he was so young, and I'm this age, like, he didn't even get to do this and that and see or get an idea of who he might be in the world. And I had guilt, like, dang, like, just like, why him? Why not me?
Mhm.
Um, I do talk myself, I don't want to say talk myself out of it, but I soothe myself. And I talk about what I know he did bring to the world and what I do feel like he recognized about what he brought to the world and how he was coming into his manhood and
Mhm.
he was learning boundaries. Some people don't ever get to that point,
Yeah.
learning boundaries. And I was really, it just like helps me feel better. Like, okay, you know, maybe he was making space for somebody else to make it into the world
Mhm.
because maybe he passed the test that he was supposed to be here for.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's what I got.
That's a beautiful share, too. And it is very relatable to understand. It's like, I went through that, so why'd I make it and he not?
Yeah.
And trying to make sense of it, right? It's just the brain trying to say, if this happened with him, how could I calculate when it will happen again with another family member? How can I calculate if it will happen again with someone else I know as a friend? And it's just trying to prepare you. But sometimes I really do think death happens in some wild, bizarre ways, some out of the blue ways, just to remind us, don't take being present for granted. What some people accomplish, like your cousin, in 20, 21 years is more than some people, it would seem, have accomplished if they lived to be in their 90s. It's all about the quality of the life you live and what you are giving of yourself and to yourself and to others while you're living. And so we don't know what more he could have done, but we can be incredibly grateful for the impact and the influence of what he did do and how that impact and influence has a continuous ripple effect that will be long standing. So I know it's tender, but it's still working its magic because hearing about him has blessed me, even if I didn't get to meet him. That's good stuff. I'm so proud of each of you. I know we carry such tenderness with us, and there are certain words, certain phrases we'll catch ourselves say. You'll start to picture the grocery aisle. You'll start to picture that moment where you broke down and your voice will quiver, and all these things will start rushing in. And that's okay. That's okay. We're going to make it a point as we move into this very brief. We're not going to go super in depth, but I want to catch you at this sensitive moment and I want to guide you to yourself. And then I'm going to share with you some rituals that are meant to support you as you integrate your loved one's transition into your current reality. Okay? We're not leaving nobody behind. We're just shifting how we connect with them. That's what we need. So, for this meditation, you don't have to close your eyes. You can just soften your gaze. And I just want you to, in the midst of softening your gaze, make sure that you are sitting comfortably. If there's any part of you feeling tense or achy, just breathe deep in through your nose and aim your oxygen at that part that feels tension, that part that feels tight or overwhelmed. Okay, you could just soften your gaze and breathe deep in through your nose, aiming air at the parts of your body where there might be discomfort. And if you're not experiencing any discomfort anywhere, that's wonderful. Just keep breathing deep into your belly and exhaling gently through your lips. And I want you to find your own natural breathing pattern that's comfortable for you. Okay? And I just want you to imagine walking inward toward the version of yourself that existed before the loss. Maybe you remember what you were wearing when you got the phone call. Maybe you don't. Maybe you remember where you were. So maybe you imagine walking inward to that room to meet yourself where you were when you found out. And instead of the phone call, instead of the other person walking in to deliver the news, I want you to walk in. I want you to deliver yourself to you. Take a deep inhale in through your nose, filling your belly, reminding yourself you're here with you. Exhale. And as you approach this previous version of you, I want you to notice your innocence. I want you to notice how unaware, how unassuming you were of what was coming. And I want you to behold how you deserved nothing but compassion and comfort and gentleness as you moved into a new understanding of a new life you did not ask for. Sit beside yourself in this vision. Hold your hand. And while you don't have permission to tell you who is about to transition, how it's going to happen, your work is just to sit here with you and to share that what is about to come is going to transform us. It is going to challenge us in a way we've never been challenged. We are going to meet more of ourselves than we have ever met before. We're going to see parts of ourselves we might not have even had an interest in seeing. But we are going to rise from this. This is not meant to defeat us, even though at certain moments it will feel like it could. And as you might imagine, past you probably would get anxious, probably get afraid, but use your reassurance to ground them. Even though you know there are going to be moments that they feel like they are going to float away, you in this moment ground you. Let them know that you will be there to meet them as they move through this challenge. The fact that you can come back and tell them this shares that the tragedy did not lead to your complete demise. And that any time as they move through this transition, that they need to reach out because they feel like they're drowning, just to know that they always have you with them. You always have you with you. You know better than anyone what this did to you. So be with yourself in it. Take a deep inhale in through your nose. Let it go. I want you to imagine that you and you have an understanding. That they accept you can't tell them what's coming, but that they do believe you will be there waiting for them on the other side. And before you go, let that part of you offer you a message. Let them offer you a reminder, a symbol to carry forward. Maybe it's something familiar. Maybe it's an inside joke between you and your inner child. Maybe it's something that they carried near and dear to them at that time that you haven't seen since then. Maybe they just remind you of where you placed that little emblem or where that card is at. But once you receive this from them, wrap your arms around them, kiss the side of their face, take a deep inhale in through your nose, and return gently to your body. And when you're ready, if you feel called and led to share, I would love to invite you to just say, what did the earlier version of you need to hear from you today? Maybe you feel like sharing that, maybe you don't. But the invitation is there, and we'll have a moment of silence to see if you do.
My reminder, what I myself needed to hear was what you said about me being with me no matter what. It's like I forget that. Like I always just think of myself as just one. And I know that no matter what happens, I will still have me.
Mm-hmm.
Like in addition to me,
Yes, ma'am.
I had the visual and I felt the visual. And that's what I needed myself to know, my younger self to know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
We got you.
We got you. We exist on the other side of this. And we actually are still enjoying our life. Yeah, there's still joy on the other side of this, somehow, some way. Anybody else want to share before we start to wrap?
I can say the mind picture that keeps coming to mind was 11 years ago. Yeah, it was as if, you know how if a house burns down, you still have pieces of wood, and you got the foundation, you got pieces of wood hanging around. I mean, they may be burned or charred or whatever, but they're still there. There's some structure, something there. And at that time for me, it was as if a bomb had exploded on the house, and
Mm-hmm.
all that was there was this big gully, this big hole in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
No foundation, no, and having no anticipation of ever being able to rebuild anything on this piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
And to recognize now who this this being is that that understands that explosion
Mm-hmm.
um, wiped out all that was necessary
Mm-hmm.
for me to transmute all the pain and anguish and hurt and all of that
Yeah.
into something that couldn't have been built on the old foundation. It just couldn't have been built there. It didn't need to start over on the old foundation.
Mm-mm.
It had to it had to be something original.
Yeah.
It had to be something true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a hard truth, but it's a real truth. Because once again, if you would have told you 11 years ago, do you want a new foundation where the sky's the limit and you could build literally anything because you now understand yourself more deeply? Or do you want your wife to live?
Well,
My
it
wife
would
to
have been
live?
yeah, yeah.
So what do you mean? I don't even know these abstract magical words you're using for those other possibilities. I want my spouse. So that's what I want. But you don't even know what you need. You know what you want and you've gotten what you needed, and that's so beautiful that you can acknowledge that despite how wildly uncomfortable of a truth it can be. Yeah. Sheila.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that was pretty deep, brother. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Um, I was just gonna say I'm just really struck by like how carefree I was, and just how just completely unaware.
Mhm.
And I kind of miss that
Mhm.
just, like, oh wow, you had no idea this was coming.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that I'm able to tell me is that you're gonna make it. You're gonna make it.
Good.
And similar to what the sister just said, we got you. But just you're gonna make it. But just that just really struck by how completely unaware I was, like just having the rug pulled out, just just completely blindsided. Like, wow, had no idea this was coming.
No idea.
Uh,
No idea. Now, too, of all times, like, and I don't know what we imagined it would be like when it came. I don't know if we thought we would sense it coming in the atmosphere, but it just came out of literally effing nowhere. And
yeah,
we're just supposed to pick up and move forward. So we're with you. We as a group
yeah,
collectively understand exactly that sensation. And that's what makes most of us cling to our grief. We were
mm,
so carefree before this happened. So we cling to the grief so that we're never blindsided again, but
mm,
we don't remember to cling to our joy. We're so afraid that the joy will be ripped away again that we're like, no, no, the joy isn't safe to reach for. The grief is, though, because at least this keeps it close to me, so I'm never surprised by it again. But you also don't learn how to live with it. You just learn how to suffer underneath it. And we're meant to not suffer beneath our grief, but to grow and expand to carry our grief in a sustainable way. The amount of love we have for these people, for these past versions of ourselves that we no longer get to show up as, it's not going anywhere.
yeah,
I haven't read anything that's convinced me. Time does heal all wounds. It softens it. But it's 11 years later and I can still sob like a baby at the drop of a dime about my mother. Don't get me to lying. So my
mhm,
assumption is that the goal isn't that I'm supposed to forget. My assumption my assumption is not that the goal is to forget. My assumption is that it is for me to learn how to live with this and grow with this and grow bigger around it so that there's room for both my grief and my joy and it can all fit in here some way somehow. So, with that being the case, I want to cover a couple of different reminders and suggestions for how to help your brain and your body start to acclimate to your loved one or the situation, the relationship that has transitioned or shifted, right? So, ritual essentially gives our brains and bodies predictability when the world has changed unexpectedly. Ritual helps our identity reorganize after loss and gives us a structured way to express grief instead of suppress our grief. So, a couple of examples. And there are even more activities and more suggestions of ways to connect with yourself in a course that we offer called More Than Grief. And so that's a self paced course. It is $30 on our website, but it's about 4 or 5 different talks that came from that More Than Grief experience we've done over the years so that you can further dive in and unpack different forms of grief. Due to time this evening, we didn't even get to deep dive into all the different formats, right? Like compound and disenfranchise. We've been posting about those forms of grief on our social media, but we do talk directly about those forms in the More Than Grief self-paced course on our site. But before we send you home this evening, let's give you some examples of rituals so that you can start to help train your brain to better navigate the disorientation and to understand how to adapt to they're here, just different. So it might look like you saying a specific prayer before bed. Maybe it's their favorite prayer. Maybe it's their favorite verse. But whatever it is, it's something that holds specific weight for that person or that person and you. You might choose to wear their favorite color on a certain day of the week. If they really like Tuesdays and they really liked orange, maybe you wear orange every Tuesday. That could be your little way of integrating them into your life in a fun way, right? And every time you catch a reflection of yourself, you see a reflection of them because that's their color. Maybe you start by lighting a candle for them on meaningful dates. Maybe specifically a certain scent that they like so that you're working with other sensory aspects of you to integrate like, this brings their energy into my space. Even though I can't see them, I'm still sensing them, right? So if there's a particular essential oil that they liked, or incense they burned, maybe you start to burn those on particular occasions. Talking to them when you see a certain animal or sign. Listen, what you gon' catch me doing is constantly talking to myself. And then when I feel like my mom has communicated something to me, you will catch me talking out loud to her. And you will not catch shame coming from me about this. If I got to, I will pop a little ear pod in and people will think that I'm just on the phone. Don't worry about who I'm talking to. It's none of your business. It's making me feel regulated. So I'm not going to shame myself. I'm going to find my tools. I'm going to, when I see the butterfly go by, or when I see 3 red birds following each other, or when I see a plane go by in the sky and it has that long white trail behind it, I'm like, oh, hey, mama. What was I thinking about just now that you might want me to really focus on? Like, you're getting my attention for something. What do you want to talk about? Let's start to engage. Because if they're trying to communicate, who are we to leave them on red? I want all my messages from my mama. So, how can you stay open to all your messages from your loved ones, even if your loved ones are you from the past? How can you stay open to little glimmers of who you once were in moments in the present moment? How can you appreciate those? Not try to relapse and go back to being that person. That's not what we're doing this for. We are accepting that that is a past moment. But there is a sweet place in the present for sacred aspects of the past, right? So other examples might include reciting a mantra when you see something in particular that reminds you of your person, keeping a photo altar or small space dedicated to them, playing a song that reminds you of them every Sunday morning, or journaling a memory once a month. Maybe even cooking one of their recipes on specific anniversaries and setting a plate for them and just enjoying that meal. And then maybe just touching an item of theirs before you leave the house. I know that I carry my mom's, she was a seamstress, so she had measuring tape. She has this long yellow measuring tape. It's always in my purse. It does nothing for anybody else, but it does everything for me to know that I'm carrying this thing that my mom handled so much all the time. She made clothes for the whole family. Something about carrying that around with me brings me tremendous comfort. So that's just a little ritual. And every time my hand happens to graze across it, I'm like, oh yeah, my mom was with me. That's great. And for a lot of people, you don't like to let yourself get so excited about them being here because you're afraid of looking foolish. Or maybe based off of how you were raised, it's not appropriate to think you still have access to talk to your loved one because they're on the other side now, and you won't get to really be with them until after you pass away. But I do believe that the Creator is so loving that as long as we are still incorporating and encompassing a loving heart towards our loved ones, it's okay that we still are nurturing our relationship with them. Because we're nurturing our brain's way of accepting that this is the new normal that we are going to have to adapt to and move forward with. So these are the tidbits, these are the focus points, these are the takeaways that I want for you this evening. I want you to recognize that grief, while it is a lifelong experience, doesn't have to only be experienced as lifelong suffering. It can be a way for us to carry our tenderness, not just our tension. But it's about how many outlets we find for ourselves to release the energy that can sometimes feel trapped in us when we haven't processed so many of the emotions tied to our grief-based experience. We truly are more than grief, even though it feels like grief consumes everything. So if you are someone who recognizes that you are going to want more insight over how to support yourself through your grief experience, I have dropped into the chat box 2 things. There is the link to our e-course page on our website. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll find More Than Grief. And like I told you, it's about maybe at least 3 to 5 different talks, maybe an hour and a half each about grief. And then also some other YouTube videos and slides that I have found helpful as resources. And so these resources are just meant for you to guide you through this experience at your own pace in your own time. And I've also included a note reflection from all the different types of experiences emotionally, the disorientation, the rage that we talked through this evening, as well as prompts that we didn't get to necessarily talk through that you might want to reflect on in your own time. So that's an attachment that's in the chat box. If you'd like to click and download that, please feel free to. It'll also make sure that you're reminded of the link to the website, just in case you don't grab it now, you can grab it later. But this makes a wonderful holiday gift, especially for peers who you know might really have benefited from this conversation tonight. Make sure that you share the More Than Grief experience as a self-paced course with them, so that even if they didn't want to be in the space live, they can still get the information and the understanding. Okay? So I want to thank you for being present with me, and I will hang back to answer any questions you might have.